create a nice maybe glitchy sound, or something along those lines. Maybe something to use as a glitch up sound or glitch sound, or maybe even something as like a nice filler bass. We'll see what happens. I'm gonna go ahead and just crank up this level here, and I'll leave the attack and release the way it is. Just want the sound to sustain. I'm gonna go ahead and look for a nice wavetable here. I think I'll go with one of these groan wavetables, and I'm just gonna press Alt, well, hold Alt and drag down over here, and holding Alt will allow me to switch between octaves. So I'm just gonna go ahead and bring this down 2 octaves and mess around with this wavetable position until I get a nice kind of groany sound. And I think I'll actually use this formant warping function here, and using the intensity you can switch between intensities of the warping. So I'm just going to leave this as it is right now, and I'm going to layer it up with another wavetable. I'm also going to send these, actually I'll send these both 50-50 into filter 1 and 2, and go ahead and look for a nice wavetable. I quite like the carbon wavetable. I'm going to go ahead and mute the first one and check out this carbon. Bring up the amp and maybe bring this down by an octave. So I quite like this area here in the wavetable, and I'm just gonna bring a macro over here and start modulating some things. We have the bipolar function right now because we're under the regular LFO, and I think that's what I'll use. Normally like to use these patterns, but I think for this kind of sound this would be more appropriate. So I'm going to switch it to the sawtooth wave, from the sine wave here to the sawtooth, and I'm going to sync it. Actually no, I'll keep it unsynced. I'm going to bring the rate up and apply LFO 6 to the rate. Just going to bring it down almost halfway. Got to hold in on that in a little bit. And I'm going to use the sawtooth for the LFO 6 as well. And I'm going to sync it. I'm going to play the sound a couple of times and find the right spot, well, the right ratio for this to modulate the rate of LFO 5, so I can have kind of a, let's see, kind of a like fall down effect, like going from a high rate to a low rate. So that's doing the opposite of what I want, so I'm gonna invert this. Actually, so I'll just keep this unsynced. I'm gonna play around with the rate freely. Now I'm gonna adjust this a little bit, maybe bring it up a bit. I'm going to bring both these amplitudes down and just apply this modulation of the 5th LFO all the way. So that's kind of the movement that I'm going for here. Just got to adjust some of these modulations a bit. Maybe try out the sine wave for different curves. I think the wobbly sine wave kind of sounds better with this. Maybe slow this down a little bit. Kind of like that. And for this, I'm just gonna use a sine wave 2 octaves down, just kind of a sub bass, and apply the same LFO 5 to this. Now I'll take LFO 7, which is under performer mode. I'm just going to switch this to LFO, and I'm going to sync it and use the 1/2 ratio, and I'm going to bring this on all my pitches. All my pitches love LFOs, and I'm gonna bring these up by 7 semitones. I'm not proud of that joke. So got this little pitch bend here. Of course, we can adjust this and kind of use our own custom pitch bends if we choose performer mode, but I think I'm just going to use the sine wave and adjust this a little bit. Yeah, I think it's fine where it defaults to, but maybe slow it down a bit. And maybe mess around with this formant sound a bit, try to get it to be a bit more low pitched. Maybe try some phasing. So that's already starting to sound pretty glitchy and weird and kind of mangled. I'm going to use this phase over here under the modulation oscillator and apply this to the first LFO with the formant warp type. So I'm going to bring this LFO 7 onto the modulation oscillator as well. Bring it up by 7 semitones and apply the same movement to this so it'll sound more synced up and cleaner. Alright, so we're getting a little bit closer here. I'm gonna visit these bottom inserts over here in a second. First I'm going to start with some modulation here on the filters. I'm going to use the band reject filter, and I'm going to go ahead and send it into serial and send this into mix 1 so I can hear it all the way. Bring this fader all the way up and just kind of hone in on a cool position with these knobs, the cutoff and the bandwidth knobs. If you're not familiar with the band reject filter, visually it looks something like this. This is kind of what the band reject filter looks like, to give you kind of a visual representation, so you can get some really nice sounds out of a filter like that. So I think I'll use the same modulation that I used for the pitch on the cutoff. I'm going to control the bandwidth separately, and I'm going to use this LFO 6, which we use for the rate of LFO 5. Just going to bring it up here. Now we're losing a lot of sub bass here, so this kind of patch may need to be layered with a sub bass, or it could just be used as a nice mid-range sound. Since I am making this kind of sound with glitch hop in mind, I'm already kind of happy how it sounds, almost like Foley, if you know what I mean, and has a nice little crunchy and mangled texture to it, so it's already working out perfectly here. So it may not even need a sub bass. Something like this could be layered on other sounds or used differently. Really kind of happy with how it's already going, so let's go ahead and bring this down into the middle so we have mix 1 and 2, and choose one of these filters to do some further filtering. I'm gonna go ahead and play around with this comb filter a bit. So that sounds pretty cool. Maybe modulating the pitch could sound cool, but Not too sure how that will work out with these pitch modulations, so let's go ahead and just do some trial and error here. That's actually sounding pretty cool. Gonna go ahead and just play around with the unisono too, give it some voices and see what it sounds like spread out a bit. So it's sounding kind of neuro-funky almost. I'm gonna see how this would sound spread out and panned out a bit. Love it, love it, love it. So let's give it a bit of dimension expansion. Just gonna bring the dry wet up a bit and the size down quite a bit. And give it a bit of distortion. Actually, I'm gonna bring the Bronner tube on the first effects and the dimension expansion on the second one. So same settings here. And Bronner tube, I'm just gonna bring the drive up a bit and bring the mix, the dry wet, down quite far, so just to mix the distortion in a little bit. And now moving on to the EQ. We've lost all the sub bass, so there's not much to do with these knobs here, and I don't think it needs a lot of low frequencies. Something to do is maybe take the boost down, so we're creating a kind of notch, and maybe modulate the frequency of that notch with the LFO 7. So I'm going to boost the low shelf a bit and just take the high shelf down by the tiniest amount just to kind of try and flatten it out. We're not going to get any sub bass from this third oscillator, but it's still there. It's still doing something, so I'm not going to remove that either. What I will do is possibly mess with some more of these modulation oscillators. I'm going to mess with the position for the third oscillator, the sub bass, since we don't need it to be a sub bass anymore. See what else we can do to kind of mangle the sound up a bit. Gonna go to the noise oscillator, and I'm gonna look for the paper oscillator, which is kind of like a paper sound. If I mute all these oscillators and these filters, you can hear what it sounds like. So that will lend perfectly for this kind of sound. I'm going to use the 7 LFO again on the amplitude. So it's just going to kind of layer in with that and bring in the oscillators back and the filters. We get this. Not really noticeable, but it's in there. Maybe give it a bit of feedback. Getting a bit of cool, some cool sounds from that. For the inserts, I'm gonna actually leave these alone. I don't believe that they need much here, and I'm gonna see what I can do with these warping modes. Carbon wavetable, I'm gonna add the bend plus. But it's not really noticeable either, most likely due to this comb filter. So I think the sound is pretty much there. I'm going to save this to my own library. Definitely love this kind of sound. It's going to be cool in a kind of glitch up or neurofunk track. So yeah, with that being said, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and this sound. And with that being said, you guys have a good one.